Hello everyone, and welcome to week 1 of English 200 or 201. This week, we're going to be talking about the following assignments. I'll talk to you a little bit about what creative writing is as a whole. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how this class will work and the required text for this class. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about a section on our Blackboard site called When You're Looking for More to Do. And you'll begin with your first assignment, which is an introduction conversation. This week's lecture is going to be about poetry, because we're going to start with poetry this week and next week. We're going to start off slow with poetry. We're going to look at, we're going to look at how poetry is made up of stanzas and line breaks. And then we're going to write 2 writing exercises. The first one's called a 10-minute spill. The second one is called an object poem, and the sample poem we're going to be basing it off of is an Ode to Salt by Pablo Neruda. Then finally, you'll be assigned one formal writing assignment where you'll be able to revise one of those 2 exercises into a finished poem. Your readings for this week, you're to read a few things you should know about creative writing, pages 1 through 8 in our book, Creative Writing by David Starkey. You're also going to start reading Chapter 1, Writing Poetry. You'll read pages 14 through 30. All right, well, let's start off with talking about what creative writing is. In this class, creative writing represents learning how to write from 3 different genres, and genres are the different types of writing, the different categories. So we're going to be learning how to write poetry. We're going to be learning how to write creative nonfiction, and we're going to be learning how to write fiction. One of the most important things about creative writing is that in order to become better at creative writing, you have to write in order to learn how to write. And you have to really read a lot of really great writing in order to be able to learn how to become a great creative writer. Some people often, beginning creative writers, say that they're worried about reading too much in a different, of a specific person in their genre because they're afraid they'll be influenced. If they read a bunch of Bukowski, maybe they'll write like Bukowski. Well, you know what? That's not a bad thing. You're becoming a writer, and I'll say this from my own experience because I read extensively. I'm a poet, but I also write fiction, and I also write creative nonfiction, but I'm primarily a poet. And when I'm writing in a specific genre, I tend to read so much writing in that genre just so that I can feel alert and alive in that genre. You can only gain from seeing brilliance on the page. So you really want to embrace any kind of influence that you feel from reading other people's writing. Let their awesomeness really inspire you. Another thing that's really important in creative writing is that you don't just sit down and write a draft and it's done. Creative writing is a laborious project. You write draft after draft after draft, and part of what we're going to be learning in this class is how you best improve your drafts, how you move forward. You write your initial inspiration on the page, and then what are the next steps to creating an actual finished piece. Revision is really the act of reconsidering and altering a piece of writing. So maybe you'll just save one line from a free write you did, or maybe you'll save one image from it and then keep going, or maybe you'll keep the whole thing and just keep refiguring it into different configurations and change the line breaks or change the stanzas. But the main thing you really, really want to remember in this class is that creative writing is mining the vast field of the imagination. You have an amazing imagination, and this class is a way for you to tap into what's inside your mind and find worlds you never even knew existed. So how does it work? Each week, I'm going to be creating a lecture like this one on Mondays, and I will post it by the end of the day on Monday. You're to watch the lecture first, then read the required texts. Each week there'll be minimal amount of reading. Then you want to participate in the discussion forum. So this week, for example, you're going to be participating in a discussion forum called an introduction, where we're just going to be getting to know each other. You not only want to post your own post, which should be a significant post where you answer all the questions that are being asked of you, you also need to respond to at least 3 of your peers' posts. You can respond to more if you'd like, but at least 3. And you need to, when you respond, you need to really respond with something significant, like add to the conversation in some way. Don't just say, I agree, Tell us why you agree. Tell us what you're thinking about. Tell us how it reminds you of something else. Then the next step is to try the writing exercises in your writing journal. Each week you'll have at least 2 writing exercises. These are meant for you to try out new things. You will be graded on how hard you try, not on the exact work that you put out. Finally, you're going to choose one of those writing exercises to revise for a formal writing assignment that you'll turn in by the end of the week. And the end of our week will always be Monday at 11:59 p.m. We're going to spend 2 weeks on each genre in this class, 2 weeks on poetry, 2 weeks on creative nonfiction, and then 2 weeks on fiction. And then for your final, you're going to be asked to create a portfolio that's going to consist of revised formal assignments. Also during the semester, you're going to be required to participate in one-on-one conference with me. This conference can be held in person, via Skype, or over the phone. But I'll give you more details about that next week, and we'll start setting up conferences next week as well. If you have any questions about how this class will work, please make sure you reach out to me so that I can answer them for you. It's really important, guys, that we stay in communication. Since this class is only 6 weeks long, it goes by fast, and the more that we can communicate, the better. All right, here's what our book looks like. It's called Creative Writing: An Introduction to Poetry and Fiction. It's available at the bookstore. You must have it this week, or you may be dropped from the class. So, in case after you get all of your assignments for the week, you are still, you finish everything and you're like still inspired and you want to do more, I set up a section called called Going Further, and it's got links to all kinds of resources for creative writing. I'll also be talking about these a little bit in our one-on-one conference, and I'll also, if you guys ever have any questions about creative writing, about publishing, about what to read, suggestions on different poets or fiction writers or creative nonfiction writers that you might be interested in, please don't hesitate to contact me. As a creative writer, this is one of my favorite things to talk about, so don't be afraid to reach out. All right, so for your first assignment is to write an introduction post in the introduction conversation. One of the most important aspects of a creative writing class is creating an environment where everyone feels welcomed and encouraged to try new things. Let's begin creating that environment by getting to know one another. Please click on the link under this week's content called Introduction Discussion to get started. In this discussion forum, you're going to be asked to post the following information. You're going to ask to write your name and where you're from. You're going to tell us your background, if any, in creative writing. And then you're going to give us your favorite poem or story and an explanation as to why this is your favorite poem or story. Make sure you include the text, if possible, or a link to the text so that we can see which story you're talking about or which poem you're talking about. Finally, what's really important is that you post a photo of yourself in some way. Some people don't feel comfortable posting a photo, and that's fine, but you need to post some sort of graphic so that we have something in our mind associated with you whenever you're posting. This really helps build community within our creative writing class. All right, so this week what we're going to be talking about is poetry and how to write good poems. The reading assignment that you want to start with is to read a few things you should know about poetry. That's found on pages 14 and 15 of our book. You're also going to be reading all the way through page 30. but we'll be talking about that in the rest of this lecture. But the thing that I really want to a lot of people get really worried about writing poetry, and there's really no reason. Poetry is a very natural thing to write. We just kind of put a lot of barriers between ourselves and writing poetry as we grow up. I teach something called California Poets in the Schools, which means I go into classrooms from kindergarten till 12th grade, and I teach people a 1 hour poetry lesson, and they write a poem. And you would be surprised at what brilliance these children write with, because they don't have, especially third, fourth, fifth grade, there are no barriers set up yet that say, that's stupid, that's absurd, you can't write that. What you need to do when you're writing poetry is to break down those barriers. Poetry is all about going, making it new, saying things in a way that they've never been said before. Um, I really like Edward Hirsch's explanation of what poetry is. He says it's an inexplicable, though not incomprehensible, event in language that is experienced through words. What that means is you want to create something that's inexplicable. It's something that hasn't been experienced before. It's a new way to say something about, say, the color blue, right? That associates different ideas of blue, like the sadness of being blue, the blue of the ocean, the feeling of blue water. Maybe it's very cold. Maybe a blue is your favorite color and it makes you feel comfort. Um, going Thinking about all the associations that this word can have when you write with it. Um, Poetry can appear in meter or in free verse. Um, the whiskey on your breath could make a poor man shudder. So the sound of poetry can be marked in meter. That means it sounds like music. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night. You hear an exact beat in that line. But there's also what most poetry is these days is free verse, and that means the sound of the line, the sound of the line is not metered. It doesn't follow an exact cadence, a marked cadence. It's free. It can go slow and then fast. It can vary in 3-beat lines or 10-beat lines. There's even poetry that looks like prose, only it still uses all of the tools of poetry, and that's called a prose poem. We'll be looking at that next week as well. One thing that you want to avoid when you're writing poetry is cliches. Cliches are the way that everyone refers to certain things. Um, let's see. Let me see if I can think of a cliche off the top of my head. Um, uh, of course I can't because I'm recording a lecture, but I will think of one and come back to that in a second. But cliches are the way that we always talk about things, and because poetry is about making it new, because poetry is about finding a new way to say something that creates an emotion, you want to avoid cliches. Poetry isn't a magical visit from the muse. A lot of people feel like, oh well, poetry is it's not really something that you just have to wait for the moment when you feel inspired and then you can write it. That's not true. Poets who write on a daily basis, um, they don't wait for inspiration to hit them over the head before they start writing. They sit down and they begin composition, and they work and they work and they work. So in this class, you can't give me the excuse that, oh, I just couldn't, I didn't feel it this week. I just couldn't, I wasn't inspired. You need to make inspiration. Inspiration comes from mining that field of your imagination. Most poems begin from an idea, but they go through many, many drafts before they reach their finished form. We will be doing a lot of revision in this class, and I am a poet who writes through a lot of revision, and I believe in revision. I think it's a very important part of the writing process. Finally, the secret to writing good poems is write a lot, read a lot, and learn how to revise. So there's several elements to a poem. Poems are made up of lines and stanzas. They are controlled by meter and rhythm, even when they aren't formal poetry. There is often meter and rhythm within a poem. The music of poetry is the sound, the play of sound inside of a poem, alliteration, um, uh, images, symbols, and figurative language. That's one of the backbones of writing poetry. Metaphor and simile. Metaphor is when you directly compare something to something else, and simile is when you use like or as to compare two things. Diction, syntax, and the language of poetry, and poetic forms. These are all elements of a poem, and we're going to be talking through each and every one of these elements. This week, though, we're going to be focusing on lines and stanzas. But before we get going with that, I want to talk about two different types of poetry. There's lyric poetry, which is a shorter, non-narrative poem that presents a single speaker who expresses a state of mind or a process of thought and feeling. And there's narrative poetry, a poem that uses the elements of storytelling, and uses multiple points of view. So what I'd like you to look at in this week's reading is there's three examples that we're going to be referring back to throughout the next 2 weeks as we learn more about the details of poetry. We will be talking about these poems next week in our discussion forum. The first one is My Personal Recollections About Not Having Been Invited to the Prom by Gail White, which is a sonnet. It's a formal poem. The second is Winter by Ruth Stone, which is a lyric poem, gorgeous lyric poem. And the third one is Duration by Ray Armatrout, and this is really a language poem, and it's a beautiful poem as well, but it takes a lot of getting used to. So we're going to start off by looking at Winter by Ruth Stone. Sorry. I'd like you to read this poem. I'd like you to look at how this poem is telling a story in a new way. What do you see? What's being done that's different than just talking about what winter looks like? Instead of just saying there's snow on the ground, I'm at a train station. How does Ruth Stone use this idea of a train station to talk about something completely different? There might be words in here that you don't know, like the word ravish. That's a really complicated word. Make sure you look it up because it really, really, when you end a poem with the line, I feel their entire histories ravish me. It's a really solid and strong ending to the poem. So please spend some time reading through this poem, thinking about coaches like loaves of bread powdered with snow. I mean, that's a beautiful simile. The idea that what she's using this train station to stand for. All right, so the backbone of poetry are lines and stanza. So poetry is broken into lines that typically begin on the left-hand side of the page. So if you look back at Winter by Ruth Stone, you'll see that the lines don't go all the way to the end of the page. The reason why is because the poet wants to emphasize the last lines of these, the last words in each of these lines. So where it begins and where it ends, these words are really emphasized. So when you make line breaks, you really want to think about what word is at the beginning and what word is at the end. And also the white space around words is also very important. You'll notice that in this poem, there isn't a lot of white space. There are no stanza breaks. If you break a stanza, and we'll talk about stanzas in a minute, it frees up. It makes like little mini paragraphs. Ruth Stone has one stanza. This poem is written in one clean stanza. If she were to break her lines with more white space on the right-hand side, that would make us that would air out the words more, so we'd see them. They'd be more emphasized. A line that ends with punctuation is end stopped. That makes the poem stop, slows down the pace of the poem. It's not required. You don't have to end with it. And a line that doesn't is in jammed. That means the poem will speed up. So let's look at Ruth Stone's poem. So she had the first two lines. The 10 o'clock train to New York. There's a comma, so there's a slight pause there. The 10 o'clock train to New York. Coaches like loaves of bread powdered with snow. Period. Stop. That slows the poem down. Steam wheezes between the couplings. Period. The poem is slowed down. Stripped to plywood, the station's cement standing room imitates a Russian novel. Now you see that line? There's no punctuation at the end of it, so it's enjambed. It starts to flow faster. It is now that I remember you. Period. That's a stop. We're meant to remember that person, to stop and think about it. Your profile becomes the carved handle of a letter knife. Period. We're stopping there. Your heavy-lidded eyes slip under the seal of my widowhood. Period. This is a very slow part of the poem. We're supposed to really pay attention to the images. It is another raw winter. Now, when there's a period in the middle of the line, that causes a pause, a caesura. In the middle of the line, there's a break. That means we stop as a reader. There's a raw winter that we're stopping in. And then stray cats are suffering, period. There's double suffering in that line. Raw winter and the stray cats are suffering. Starlings crowd the edges of chimneys. You see so slowly this poem is going at this point. It is a drab misery that urges me to remember you, period. I think about the subjugation of women and horses, semicolon. Brutal exposure, semicolon. Weather that forces, that strips. So this poem is going so slow here. In our time we met in ornate stations arching up with 19th century optimism. I remember you running beside the train, waving goodbye. I can produce a facsimile of you standing behind a column of polished oak to surprise me. Am I going towards you or away from you on the train? Discarded junk or other mines is strewn beside the tracks. Mounds of rusting wire, grotesque pop art of dead motors, senile warehouses. The train passes a station. Fresh people standing on the platform, their faces expecting something. I feel their entire histories ravish me. So you see how she really plays with the end of the line. Those last words on the poem, on those lines are so important, and the way she uses punctuation at the end of the line is also very important because she's using that as a way to control the speed of the poem. Now the stanza, and in this example we only have one stanza to look at, but the stanza is, it comes from the word in Italian which means little rooms. It's the groupings of lines in a poem. And often the lines that are grouped together are connected in thought or purpose, like a paragraph in prose. There's really so many ways to group lines. You can do two lines together, which are called couplets. And you see that in Ray Armantrout's poem Duration. That's found on pages 22 and 23. She has those flurries of small pecks, stanza break. My mother called leaky faucet kisses. Those are two couplets. The whole poem is written in couplets. A tercet is 3 line stanzas that are 3 lines long. A quatrain is 4 lines. You get the idea. All the way down to an octet, which is 8 lines long. When you are thinking about stanza breaks, you want to think about where the idea of the poem switches a little, or where you want to put more white space around an idea. So for this week's writing exercises, I really want you to think about these ideas of line breaks and the idea of uh, letting your imagination go wild and really letting yourself open up to new ways of thinking and of thinking about things, or really new ways of saying things, right? So the first writing exercise we're going to do this week is a 10-minute spill. You will only have 10 minutes to complete this. So please make sure you set a timer because we're not in class. I can't watch you do this. So if you cheat, you cheat. But you'll get the best uh, you'll be surprised by yourself if you do this in 10 minutes. So what you have is 10 minutes, and the first thing before you begin writing, I'd like you to think of a proverb or an adage or a cliche, or a familiar phrase like she's a brick house or between the devil and the deep blue sea or one foot in the grave or a stitch in time saves nine. Something that your mom always said to you or your grandma always said to you, something you hear all the time. You can also use like a phrase from advertising you hear all the time, something that's overused and doesn't really mean a lot anymore to you. I'd like you to take that and write it at the top of your page, and change it in some way. So title your poem whatever that is, okay? And then you're going to write 10 lines of poetry. So you could just label on the left-hand side of a page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I'd like you to write 10 lines that include at least 7 of the following words: cliff, blackberry, needle, fog, voice, whir, cloud, mother, lick. Okay? Any of those words, 7 of them, and write for 10 minutes. Whatever happens, happens. I think you'll be surprised at what you write. So do this writing exercise first, and this is also posted under the weekly content, guys. Don't feel like you have to do it right now. And the second one is a little bit more, it should take you a little longer to complete. It isn't a timed exercise. It's called the object poem or Ode to Salt. For this one, I want you to practice really opening up your mind to thinking about things. So I'd like you to use your 5 senses to examine. I'm sorry, this was not changed. To examine some sort of ordinary object. So a salt shaker, a fork, your kid's baseball. Anything that you see around your house that's ordinary. I'd like you to think about what the object looks like first. So just do a free write where you think of, what color is it, how large is it, just the basics of what it looks like. What does it remind, what does it remind you of? What does it look like that it reminds you of? Then I want you to think about what your object sounds like. Now, it might be that it doesn't make a sound. This is where your imagination has to kick in. So what do you imagine it sounds like? Or what does it smell like? Maybe it doesn't smell like something, okay? But you have to pretend, use your imagination. So say I have a blue water bottle that I'm drinking my water from right now. If I were to describe what it looks like, I could say it's blue as the Caribbean Ocean. It smells like salt and relaxation, right? So it doesn't actually smell like that, but I'm using my imagination to go on a journey to talk about this object. Then I want you to think about what it feels like. So it feels to your touch. Is it hard? Is it soft? Compare it to something else. Does it feel like something else? What does it remind you of? If you could just, what other things does it remind you of that are completely unrelated? If the object could take you somewhere, where would it take you? Try to imagine places that you could go. Or if the object could teach you a lesson, what would that lesson be? And I want you to be as specific as possible when you write. Don't just say the sky, say the blue summer sky streaked with contrails from the passing planes, right? Be specific. The more specific you are in your writing, the more powerful you are. The more weird you are in your ideas, the more powerful you are. So those are the two things I want you to work on in this exercise. I want you to write a poem of at least 40 lines. I don't want you to rhyme at the end of the line at all, okay? If you rhyme internally, that's fine, but don't try to rhyme, okay? There's a great example of Pablo Neruda wrote a poem called Ode to Salt, and I have it right here for you guys, where he thinks about uh, salt, just salt in itself, and thinks about where salt comes from, how salt's used by sailors. There's a beautiful reading of this poem by the poet Philip Levine. If you click on the link to the NPR story here, you'll listen to someone reading this poem. He did the translation. This translation here is a little bit different, but you'll get the idea. It's really about taking a journey in your imagination to understand an object in a new way. So that's what I would like you to do. I'd like you to write a poem like Pablo Neruda's Ode to Salt, only about your own ordinary thing. Okay? So basically, after you've written those two writing assignments, I'm sorry, those writing journal prompts, what I'd like you to do is to revise one of them. So each week, you're going to be asked to spend time revising one of the writing exercises you wrote for the week. Writing exercises will be graded on how much effort you put into crafting a finished poem. I will be looking for a difference between your writing journal and your final written poem. How did you put effort in? How do you do that? How do you put effort into revising a poem? You want to write more, then cut back. You want to play with the line breaks and stanzas. You want to refine your word choices. You want to take risks. You want to have fun, but always check your spelling and grammar before you turn it in. When you turn it in, you want to type it up in a Word document with either a .doc or .docx format and upload it as part of your assignment. All right, guys, that's it for this week. Next week, we will be writing poetry again, and I will be posting the pages later this week that'll be your reading for next week in case you want to get ahead. Please, as I will say over and over again in this class, please contact me if you have any questions. I really look forward to working with you. I'll see you online.